Hello. What can I say? I stand before you today not as a witness to the reported street protest, though I am inconveniently in Istanbul, where the internet now crawls with the urgency of a limping snail. But rather, I'm here as a concerned observer, piecing together a grim political jigsaw from behind a firewall of throttled bandwidth and vague anti terror laws, and almost wall to wall coverage of the events on national television. On Wednesday morning, Ekrem Imamolu, the mayor of Istanbul, the head of the Istanbul municipality, and the most formidable political rival to President Erdogan, was arrested. And the charges, a laundry list: corruption, aiding a terrorist organization, unlawful data acquisition, tampering with municipal tenders. And yet beneath the legalese lurks what the Western media sees as an unmistakable pattern. This is not simply a corruption probe, it's an attempt to decapitate the opposition. However, the evidence which is paraded on television is so extraordinarily damning as to be laughable, and it's being completely ignored by Western media. The arrest came days before the Republican People's Party, that's the CHP, was due to nominate Imamoglu as its candidate for the 2028 presidential election, a contest that Erdogan is constitutionally, at least, barred from entering unless the constitution is changed or elections are called early. Timing, as ever, in politics is everything. And the response has been electric. If you're to judge from the international media, that's the media based outside Turkey and outside Istanbul, tens of thousands took to the streets of Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir. If you judge from being actually here, that doesn't seem to have happened. Protesters defying a sweeping ban on demonstrations, chanting slogans, carrying placards bearing slogans like rights, law, justice, riot police retaliating with pepper spray, rubber bullets, water cannon, over 300 people arrested, social media throttled. And if you're wondering why your YouTube uploads won't process, now you know. In the words of the CHP leader Özgür Özel, it's not we who fill the streets, it's your lawlessness that has summoned the people. And yet he is one of the people who has called on citizens to gather. His party is pressing on with its internal primary on Sunday, even placing symbolic ballot boxes around the country. It's a deeply Anatolian form of civil disobedience, defiant, symbolic, and rooted in an insistence on procedural legitimacy. Meanwhile, President Erdogan has condemned the unrest, characterizing it as vandalism and street terror, and he accuses the opposition of cloaking their plundering schemes in slogans of justice. He is, in effect, criminalizing protest while insisting that the judiciary remains independent. This is, to borrow from Orwell, the language of tyranny repackaged in the idiom of law and order, or at least that's what the international commentators are wanting us to believe, and that's what the opposition party is promoting. But it's not what I see. The Interior Minister has claimed that over 300 social media accounts are under investigation for incitement. Some of those arrested have done little more than post online, and the Turkish anti-terror law is an ambiguous instrument, allowing for the prosecution of speech, association, and mere sympathy with causes that are considered dangerous. Under such elastic definitions, dissent becomes treason. So let's not underestimate the wider implications. Turkey's markets have reacted immediately. The benchmark BIS T100 index has had its worst week since 2008, since the global financial crash. The Turkish lira has plummeted. Turkey's credit default swaps, the cost of insuring its debt has risen sharply. In short, the political crackdown has eroded international investor confidence, undermining the fragile gains of the finance minister Mehmet Şimşek's recent orthodox economic pivot. What we're witnessing then is not merely a legal scandal, nor merely a protest movement. It's a systemic confrontation between two visions of Turkey, one rooted in constitutionalism, secularism, and civic democracy, the legacy of Ataturk, and the other that is presented as increasingly authoritarian, religiously infused, and concentrated in the person of Erdogan. The question that I'm interested in asking is, what is on the horizon to follow Erdogan, assuming he doesn't stand in 2028? And what is on the horizon to follow Imamolu, assuming that the charges against him are proven correct? Let's not forget, Imamolu's rise itself was extraordinary, a sort of political miracle. His 2019 victory over the ruling AK Party in Istanbul, Erdogan's own political birthplace, was a seismic moment. I remember Erdogan coming to power 25 years ago. I was here in Turkey. At the time, I remember the flags across the street. And it's very much a different feeling. Then it was palpable, and I felt I was in the middle of something that was being reported and that I could see. Now, what is reported is vastly different to what I can see and what I can feel. The what happened with Imamolu's rise in Istanbul is a question mark over Erdogan's power. Imamolu has symbolized generational change, administrative competence, and an inclusive form of nationalism. That he was re-elected last year only reinforced that narrative. And now the state, at least in one interpretation, moves to erase him, not through votes, but through handcuffs. So, returning to the Turkish constitution, it requires detainees either to be charged or released within 4 days. That deadline expires tomorrow. And I hope by that point the internet will get back to normal. The judiciary must now choose between justice and complicity. The judiciary must see through the political manoeuvring and the embellishment of reality. But I'm not convinced. I'm not at all convinced that this is a the number one, there is so much opposition, and number two, that opposition is so blameless. That among the people who've been arrested, apparently, there have been scores confessing to their misdemeanors. That doesn't look to me like the actions of people who are being unfairly targeted. The people, those who have apparently taken to the streets, have uploaded posts at glacial speeds and voted in symbolic defiance, have already made their choice. But although their activity has been promoted in the international media, I don't see it here. This movement may not vanish in a puff of legal rhetoric, but it is a test, not just of Turkish democracy, but of where the politics in this region will be decided at the ballot box or behind locked courtroom doors. I think Turkey stands at a crossroads at this moment, and I think there is significant danger of this getting out of control, precisely because of the way in which it's being reported and the way in which opposition to Erdogan is being ratcheted up and promoted in the Western media. I think one has to look more dispassionately at what's going on, and I think one has to be significantly more careful about drawing rash conclusions. And I think equally, you have to look at the damning stories or the damning evidence, the piles of cash, the overpriced villas, and the huge question mark hanging over a spurious degree. In the end, I don't think it matters whether somebody has a degree or not if they're going into political power. John Major did not have a degree, was not at university, and was one of the better prime ministers that we have had in the UK in the last 40 years. But in fact, I would dare to go so far as to say, with the exception of Blair, who at least is his parallel, if not his better, John Major has been the best prime minister since Thatcher. Because Cameron, who had every chance of eclipsing both Blair and Major, squandered it away in his contempt for the nation and for the Queen after the Scottish referendum, and bloated with his own self-confidence, he then called the referendum that has destroyed Europe the Brexit referendum. Now maybe we can claw some of that back, but I think the only way forward for Europe, for the continent, is for a defence agreement that encompasses the continent from Ireland to Istanbul and beyond. Without Turkey, Europe cannot function and cannot defend itself. And for mainstream media to seize on this present crisis and gloat as they clearly do, and select only one stream of this narrative, as they clearly are doing, is to seriously damage the prospects of survival for the continent. We are dependent on Turkey. And the sooner we recognize that fact and the importance of Turkey in the European equation, the better for us all. And I simply come back to the same thing that I've been saying again and again. Erdogan is not standing in 2028.